Welcome to the Times of Israel, What Matters Now, a weekly podcast drilling down into one issue facing Israel right now. So I am here today on Sunday afternoon with Professor Jonathan Dekel-Chen. We're actually at the BGU radio station, which has generously offered us their space in order to record this What Matters Now podcast, because Professor Dekel-Chen lives in Kiryat Gat right now. I'm in Jerusalem. And first and foremost, welcome, Professor Dekel-Chen. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to talk to us. You and I have spoken a bunch of different times over the last year and a half as you were struggling to bring your son, Sagui Dekel-Chen, home. He was taken from his home, from Kibbutz Nir Oz, where you also live, and where he was living with his family, with his wife Avital, their two children. Avital was pregnant at the time. She has since had their third child. And I can remember seeing you at a press conference, I believe on October 8th in Tel Aviv, with other dual citizens, American citizens, dual American Israeli citizens, speaking about your loved one, in your case again, your son Sagi, and this unfolding nightmare that no one really knew what it was or what it looked like at the time. And of course, you've been one of the American Israeli families within that particular group, but of course just part of the hostage family group, speaking about your son, speaking about the other hostages, trying to push through this deal. And then, thank God, Sagi came home, and which feels miraculous to all those of us watching it. And how does it feel for you?
Well, the world stopped on October 7th for anyone who had any connection to the horrific events of the day, particularly for us living on Kibbutz Nir Oz, which we now know was ground zero for the massacre on October 7th. The world stopped in any number of ways. For us, most intimately in the family, it was about a crisis. How do we get Sagi back? Sagi being among many dozens of hostages taken from Kibbutz Nir Oz alone, a small kibbutz on the border with Gaza, from which somewhere between a quarter to a third of all the people who lived there were either murdered on October 7th or taken hostage. Our homes completely destroyed, our way of life destroyed. We became refugees in our own land. Fast forward 498 days later, not knowing really what condition Sagi was in, not really being sure that he was alive, and seeing him exit a Hamas minibus at the just awful, just ghoulish ceremony, the handover ceremony in Khan Yunis between Hamas, the Islamic Jihad, and the Red Cross. We were able to exhale, I think, for the first time in 498 days. Exhale for myself, exhale for Sagi's mom, for all of those who love him, but especially for his wife Avital and his three little girls. There are huge challenges in front of us still in all sorts of ways. I'm sure we'll speak about some of them. But Sagi is home. A very lengthy series of small miracles brought him home to us from around 9:30 in the morning, or even earlier, 6:30 in the morning on October 7th, until we were able to reunite with him around noontime on February 14th, when he crossed the border into Israel.
Right. Times and days that you will never forget, ever.
Well, Sagi defined it as 43 million seconds in captivity. He absolutely felt every second, and in different ways, I think we did as well.
Jonathan, it's okay. You are, of course, the Hebrew University professor, Rabbi Edward Sandro Chair in Soviet and East European Jewry at the Hebrew University, a dual appointment in the Department of Jewish History and in the Department of General History. I think I got that right. Yeah. Yes. But is it okay if I call you Jonathan for this interview?
You'll call me Jonathan. That works even better.
Jonathan works even better. Okay. Jonathan, you said home. he came home, and of course, home to the land of Israel. But home right now for you and your extended family is Kiryat Gat, not Kibbutz Nir Oz. I would really appreciate it if you could give us a little bit of a description of what that Kiryat Gat home looks like right now. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about Nir Oz. But first, sure. Kiryat Gat.
Well, I'll describe the way in which we got there.
Okay.
As we all know now, October 7th, our homes, our way of life was destroyed. They were destroyed. The next morning, the surviving community was evacuated by the Israeli army to a hotel in Eilat,
right,
where most of us began picking up the pieces of our lives. It took a few weeks until we could even determine who was alive and who was not, who was a hostage and whose body had been quite literally dropped in our fields on the way to Gaza. We were in Eilat for about 3 months in the same hotel. It became at some point, we all understood that we had to make a move.
Yeah.
We couldn't not return to Nir Oz. First, it was a war zone. Secondly, the place is uninhabitable.
Just 6 houses or 7 houses left standing.
More or less,
mm-hmm.
Yeah. 80% of the housing and the public buildings have to be demolished on Nir Oz, and the rest are pretty much uninhabitable anyway. So it needs to be rebuilt, and that could take years. So we sought out, pretty much on our own, the government was absent. We sought out on our own an alternative for something in the order of 110, 120 households, which would accommodate those families who had survived and individual people who had survived, but also those who were in captivity.
Right.
And the place we came, we eventually were able to come to was Kiryat Gat. It's in a new section of Kiryat Gat, all new housing. And there turns out there were many, many units still unoccupied. And so with some government help and help from the JNF UK, the United Kingdom branch of the Jewish National Fund, we were able to acquire the necessary housing units and moved in there in early January of 2024 and are getting used to life still in a place.
City, right?
City life. You know, the view from my house until October 7th, 2023 was into the green fields of the Negev, and in the distance, Khan Yunis and other towns in Gaza. My view now is a parking lot outside of a multi-story building that I and we all live in, these kind of buildings. A lot of asphalt, a lot of concrete.
Elevators.
Elevators, yeah. And so for the first time, my kids and grandkids really are inhabiting homes that have elevators and stairs and all sorts of things, and assigned parking spaces in the parking lot. The people of Kiryat Gat have been really wonderful towards us in the municipality.
It's wonderful,
and they've done everything they could, as the people of Eilat were in those first 3 months after evacuation. And that's something we will always remember. That being said, you would be hard-pressed to find a more foreign environment for a bunch of kibbutzniks from the border with Gaza than Kiryat Gat. And it's a temporary, completely temporary situation. Of the surviving community, maybe 25 or 30% believe that they want to go back to a rebuilt Nir Oz some years in the future.
Wow.
About 50 to 60% want to stay together as a community, but not go back to Nir Oz, and we're exploring the possibility of resettling as a group, a multi-generational group, in a kibbutz not very far from Kiryat Gat, actually, Kibbutz Beit Nir. And about 20% of the surviving community have they just need to move on in life. And so in all ways, or almost all ways, life for us has radically changed. None of us chose this change, but it's here. And we really only can begin living again, all of us, when the remaining 14 hostages from Nir Oz, of the total of 59 still in Gaza, are freed. Those who might still be alive, and those that we know for sure have already been murdered.
Completely understandable that it feels impossible to take those steps forward until that happens. I'm wondering what it was like for Sagi. I mean, there's Sagi just being released home, and then there's Sagi coming home to Kiryat Gat, to a new baby, to, as we said, apartment living and asphalt and elevators. And of course, what we're all seeing of him in various Hebrew media interviews, and an unbelievable clip of him singing the song that he kept on singing in captivity. What we're seeing is someone who seems to be just elated at the very fact that he is alive and is home. And of course, he keeps, as so many other freed hostages do, keeps on talking about the need for all the other hostages to be brought home. If you could just share with us a little bit of what it's like to be a reunited family unit. Of course, you have many pieces of your family unit, but I think many of you were living in Nir Oz until October 7th. If you could just give us a sense of that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, all of my kids grew up on Nir Oz. 2 of the 4 decided to raise their own families.
Wow.
There's Sagi and his younger sister, and my ex-wife, the mother of my kids, and we've all lived on Nir Oz.
And you.
And myself, of course. Of course. I didn't happen to be on the kibbutz at home that morning, and that's probably the only reason that you and I are speaking today. Sagi, the best way I can explain it is that it's a 36-year-old guy who, it's as if he was born again, reborn, not in the religious sense, the evangelical sense, but as a human being. There are 500 days taken from him, each one of them in the valley of death, quite literally, for all sorts of reasons, some more obvious than others. He was completely unaware of what was going on in Israel, what was going on in the family. There's some illusion that the now men who are emerging from the tunnels knew something about what was going on the outside. Almost nothing. Sagi only learned that his wife and 2 older daughters had survived about a day and a half before his release. So for 496 days, he didn't know not only if his wife and daughters had survived, if his sister and her young family had survived, if his mother or anyone else on the kibbutz had survived. When he was taken physically by Hamas around noontime on October 7th, what he saw was the entire kibbutz burning, and he had seen bodies littering the kibbutz. He had seen people being executed. And so he simply did not know that many of his childhood friends, his best friends, were murdered on October 7th with their spouses and with their children and with their parents. We've all had, to some degree or another, a year and a half to adjust to that horrific reality. It's all coming on him very, very quickly. And it's an awful lot to handle. As far as Kiryat Gat is concerned, he's thrilled that we were able to reconstitute a version of
the kibbutz.
In a sense of a community. Of a community. It's not a kibbutz, but it is certainly a community in which we are still together. Families are intact. We are supporting each other. And, there is hope. There is hope amidst the horrific tragedy. He takes his little girls now to nursery school and to kindergarten. And among their classmates are little kids who have lost fathers, grandparents, uncles, aunts. And it's painful beyond description for all of us. For him, of course, it's even more so. And in some cases, he was held captive with some of those same uncles and friends and so on who remain behind, who are still there.
An impossible reality, really, every day.
Utterly impossible reality. that being said, he has always been someone who drank in life, and within the healing, mourning, none of us are quite there yet, but within his healing and the pain of everything that's around him, he is drinking in life very quickly. There's a lot of information he has to still learn from nearly 500 days in captivity, in an information vacuum.
Right. A little bit of a personal question. I keep on seeing him with some kind of strap on his shoulder. I assume an injury that was sustained on October 7th, and that is being dealt with.
Yes, on October 7th, he sustained a gunshot wound in his right shoulder and in his left leg. That we knew from the evidence in and around their home, and some testimony of released hostages who came home in late November, early December, and had briefly interacted with him. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on his body.
I'm sure,
and mostly on his right arm, which was rendered mostly immovable by the injuries and the lack of proper medical care. And we'll add on to that, which is true for all of the hostages who are coming out now from the tunnels, severe malnutrition, up to and including starvation, little to no medical care, horrific sanitary conditions, and the stress of living under the threat of death every second. Obviously from the captors, and we know that Hamas and Jihad captors have executed hostages.
Right.
But also, and this is an incredibly important message for Israel, for our government, that he and all of the other released hostages have been saying clearly, they all had multiple near-death experiences because of friendly fire from Israeli airplanes and artillery fire. And so all of those together have created very complex medical challenges, really, for all of the released hostages. They are driven, as you said, all of them that I know are driven to work as hard as they possibly can while recovering to get everyone home.
Right. So what does that look like right now? For instance, I know that Kiryat Gat on Saturday night has its rally, as so many other cities and towns. There's Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Haifa, and really every intersection, every town, every village has its version of that hostage protest. What does it look like in Kiryat Gat?
Well, we have that mass, I think more of a demonstration, perhaps. I'm not sure I have the right word for it than a protest.
Right, rally, demonstration.
And these are an outpouring of solidarity. There are thousands of people there every Saturday night. A very small part of that are people from Nir Oz.
Really? It's smaller from Nir Oz as opposed to...
Tiny.
Huh.
Yeah, there aren't that many people from Nir Oz. There are 200 people, including, I don't know, all the children and dogs from Nir Oz. There are thousands of people there. They're coming from Kiryat Gat, from communities all around. Some people coming in from Kibbutz Be'eri have also relocated.
Right.
They've not moved back yet to Be'eri. Religious, secular, it's extraordinary. And it does give me hope, and it certainly has buoyed us, reassuring us that we are not alone as hostage families, and we are not alone as Nir Oz. The people of Israel recognize the degree to which we have been abandoned by our government, and they come to show love and caring, whatever their political outlooks, just at a very human level. There are also daily gatherings in sort of the central square in Kiryat Gat, or in the section of Kiryat Gat that we live, where also the people of Nir Oz are just a small number of those who show up every single weekday. Nir Oz is also mobilized for focused, true protest actions in Tel Aviv and elsewhere, staging sort of campouts and sit-ins around government offices, the defense ministry, and so on. We are united not just for our own family and extended family members, but with the understanding that the country as a whole can only heal And we can only move forward as a society when all of the hostages come home, those who may still be alive and those who need to be buried. Israeli society, there's no hope for any kind of unified Israeli society. Whatever the government spouts out, there is no hope for the future of Israeli society without the hostages coming home.
Jonathan, I don't even know how many weeks or months you spent in the States as you were struggling to get Sagi home. And you were, on one hand, obviously, you were part of all the hostage families. You were also part of this group of dual American Israeli citizens. There is one living American citizen left, Idan Alexander, who is still held hostage. And you as so many hostage parents and families will say, we spoke to everyone. We spoke to everyone that there was to speak to, every leader. And of course, this also was happening as the Trump administration came into office, as the Biden administration finished up their term. I'm wondering how it all feels for you as a dual American-Israeli citizen, as a historian, how you look upon just the waves of historical intent and what happened and where you are now.
I'll just give a word of background to answer your question. It's kind of ironic or fated or mystical, I don't know. But for about the last 10 or 15 years in my professional work as a scholar, I've been working on this subject that I call informal diplomacy or non-state diplomacy and advocacy, mostly in the Jewish world, not just. And I found myself starting on roughly October 8th or 9th, 2023, practicing.
For real.
For my son and for another, at that time, 240 hostages, things that I had studied. It, in a way, it kind of gave me a relative advantage in terms of understanding
how
what might be possible,
right?
What might be possible, and the how. It was clear to me, and I think pretty much anyone else in Israel whose eyes are in their head and understand the dynamics here, that the only way even one hostage was ever going to be released would be through massive pressure from the United States. Mm-hmm. Our government, Israeli government, made it clear from the beginning that whatever lip service they were going to, and they didn't even bother with lip service in the first couple of months,
right.
Whatever lip service they were going to give about the hostages, they were never a priority for this government, and still are not. And so the pressure would have to come from the United States. The Biden administration, and it's really quite extraordinary, within 2 days of October 7th, senior officials of the Biden administration, the embassy here in Israel, the FBI, were making rounds of calls to all of the U.S. citizens. And at the time, there were many. I mean, keep in mind,
the families, sure.
Over 40 U.S. citizens were murdered on October 7th. And for quite some time, there were 8 U.S. hostages. There are currently 5, just to sharpen this point. Idan Alexander.
One alive and
4 assumed to be, 2 for sure, and then a total of 4 that are assumed to have already been murdered,
right.
Being held by Hamas. The Biden administration had embraced us immediately and made us feel at home. And over the course of, let's say, the year and 2 months that they were in office, were incredibly receptive to us in person, over innumerable Zoom conversations with the National Security Advisor, the President, the Secretary of State. And these weren't just perfunctory, pro forma. Mm-hmm. There were deep conversations in which we exchanged ideas, and they listened to us and, in some cases, adopted plans of action that we suggested.
That you were suggesting.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The Trump administration, of course, came into office, and we began reaching out to them really very shortly after the election. And to our sort of endless thanks, President Trump made it clear from maybe 2 or 3 days after the election,
right.
months before he took office that he had an expectation, and he put a date on it about hostage release.
The inaugural date, right?
Yeah. And that inserted a kind of energy into the negotiations, I think out of pure fear. Fear on the side of Hamas from what might be the repercussions, fear amongst the intermediaries and neighboring Arab countries for what might be the repercussions, and in Israel. And, our government was selling, again, some fantasy that the pressure, Trump's pressure and his team's pressure was solely focused on Hamas and maybe the intermediaries. That's a very convenient obfuscation and no more than that. It took a Saturday morning visit by Steve Witkoff to the prime minister. It's sort of unheard of to, as we say back where I came from, read him the Riot Act. I don't know what the content of that conversation was, but it changed the dynamic, and Israel agreed to move forward on the first stage, through which 33 hostages were released, amongst them Sagi. All of this, and we continue to have really great interactions.
Right, I was going to say, are there still interactions that you have with the administration?
Absolutely. It's different.
Yeah, because your person is home, and also...
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying in general for all of the hostages, it's a different kind of dynamic, but still very, very positive. And, they are open to all hostage families, particularly the U.S. hostage families. All of that stands in direct contradiction to the experience of almost all hostage families from the Israeli government. I've never been proud about that. I think it's a national disgrace, but it is the truth. Other than a very small, tiny minority of hostage families who simply for their own reasons have been completely supportive of government policy. That's maybe 5-6 families of the total.
Right.
Everyone else has pretty much been shut out and just given lip service by the government, if that.
And generally is vocal about it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I left the United States when I was 17, 18 years old. Never, I had always seen the United States from afar, particularly because I've lived abroad pretty much my entire adult life. Not feeling very close to the United States, but seeing it as a beacon on the hill.
Yeah.
And certainly under the Biden administration, and even, now with the Trump administration around the hostages, it really is the only beacon on any hill. It is abominable that hostage families need to fight so hard with our own government to get our government to do the right thing. That the vast majority, we're talking 80% of Israelis, have said clearly that they're willing to do anything to get the hostages home. It is well known that a renewal of warfare over time will only get more hostages killed, and that it's incumbent upon us to do that work. And the government itself it resists that very simple premise and that very simple millennia-old Jewish value of the sanctity of ransoming prisoners, getting hostages home. This is not new to the Jewish world, and it must always be done with the most reprehensible enemies. That's not new either. We've never had to, get hostages back from the Swiss.
Right.
Obviously, you're going to have to do it with evil people, and it's been practiced for millennia, and for good reason. I don't know what's going to happen moving forward, but I do know that for any forward movement to be achieved, the Trump administration, its team, will have to exercise brute force.
On the Israeli.
On all parties. On all parties. It is the language of the Middle East at the lowest level, and it's a hard fact that our government simply has prioritized since October 7th its own survival, its hold on power over the right thing, not just for the hostages, the hostage families, Kibbutz Nir Oz, the south of the country as a whole, for the Jewish people. One day, there will be judgment about this, and as a historian of the Jewish people, I can say for sure, these men and some women in the Israeli government will not be judged well.
Jonathan, going back to Jewish values, something that you made a comment on a week or so ago about the American Jewish organizations, and I imagine you interfaced with them over the months of the struggle to get Sagi and the other hostages home. And you made a comment that wasn't so positive about the American Jewish organizations, about their support, or perhaps not strong enough support. And I wanted to ask you about that. What did you experience, again, as someone who left the American Jewish community, who left the States decades ago, but probably had expectations of a certain kind of tacit support once you were back on U.S. soil and in this life and death struggle? So could you expound on that a little bit?
Sure. I think I came at this from two angles. First angle was a totally personal one. I grew up in the States.
Sure.
My parents and all the parents that I knew who were Jewish were very supportive of Israel. And there was a rule of thumb. Whatever Israel wants, whatever they say is right, okay, we just say amen and contribute money.
You can
whomever can contribute should contribute. And that was about it. But as luck or fate had it, I've studied these major Jewish organizations, most of whom are heritage organizations, meaning they've existed for decades, if not 100 years and more. And so looking at these North American, mostly U.S. organizations, from the beginning of their activism on behalf of Jews abroad, the end of the 19th century, I had an expectation that they would be able to recognize the situation as it is, that there is an Israeli government that is not interested, really, in sacrificing any of its power in order to get hostages home. All of these organizations, and obviously many of them were created before the state of Israel was created. They were highly supportive in getting it there.
Sure.
But even those who were created after the state of Israel, they were not created, and I say this in the most authoritative way, they were created for the good. Those of whom who have any kind of Israel agenda were created for the good of the people of Israel, for the country of Israel, not for the government and prime minister of Israel. And I know as a historian, there have been moments over time, 1970s and even after, where the major American Jewish organizations have not come in conflict, but made it clear to the Israeli government, and these are governments of the left, of the right, doesn't matter.
Sure.
That there are issues in which they disagree, and that they do what they can, and it's not limitless, they do what they can to make their position clear for the good of the Jewish people everywhere, those who are in Israel and those who are not in Israel. And too many, in my experience, I have had a lot of quality time over the last year and a half with the leaderships of all of the major Jewish organizations in North America. And too many of them chose a path of least resistance for reasons of their own and remained pretty silent about this issue of hostages. I'm not in a place yet where I want to talk about that in detail. I have lots of thoughts about it.
Right.
There's still time for course correction. There are still 59 hostages left. My request of them then and my request of them now is not to get into a political argument with the government of Israel, but to state clearly what's obvious, should be obvious to all of us, that the mitzvah, the moral imperative of the gaining the release of Jewish captives anywhere, takes priority over any other single issue that might be pursued in the context of the war, period. It seemed to me the simplest of things to get the major Jewish organizations to issue a joint statement about that, more or less, in with their own
Way
words.
back when.
A year ago plus,
Right.
and for many months thereafter. and I was completely unsuccessful. And not just me, other people. There were a couple of organizations that did a better job. And I also want to call out here the American Jewish Committee, who have gone as far as they're willing to go in this, but more importantly, they have facilitated, they have done their job. They have facilitated from October 8th the meeting of hostage families writ large with anyone and everyone on Capitol Hill,
right?
Which is their job. Whatever the leadership might think or not think within the AJC, they have really executed exactly what that organization was created for.
Right, meant to do.
Yeah, during the First World War. Or before the First World War. So my hat is off to them. As for most of the others, I think it's another group of mostly men who will not be judged well in Jewish history because they have chosen not to risk their own positions within their organizations by simply doing the right thing. And the Jewish thing and the Zionist thing.
Jonathan, I want to wrap up this podcast. You've told us a lot of things that we all want to hear and hear what you have to say. What's next for you? You like so many other hostage parents put aside everything to get your kid home. And of course, there's all this rehabilitation and the fact that you're not living in your home and what that means for the future. But I don't know, day to day, what do you think about now when you think, okay, here we are now, what's next for me and those around me?
Well, for now, for the foreseeable future, it's about getting the rest of the hostages home. 14 hostages from Nir Oz in 59 in total. It's about making sure that my family, are really whole again, that we're all, moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Certainly those who survived hell on earth on Nir Oz on October 7th.
Yeah.
Little kids and their parents. It's a good question. I myself don't really know. It's something I talk about a lot with my wife now.
Yeah.
What's next? Because anyone who experienced October 7th is a changed person.
Yeah.
I can't go back to life on October 6th. It's just not feasible.
No.
For me, it's probably going to involve figuring out ways that I can use my skills, those that I had before and now those that I've had to hone over the last year and a half to help make sure that in situations like this, that there are more tools out there for people in these kinds of situations.
This diplomacy that you were speaking of. Yeah.
But in a much more sort of practical way.
Yeah.
And
you had to learn.
I had to apply
it.
What I knew or what I had gathered over 10, 15 years of research, but apply it in a real life-saving way.
Yeah.
And I think those are things that I'd like to be able to share, to figure out exactly how to do that. But as I said, first priority is to get the family whole and to get our people back.
We are with you in that, and we wish you all the luck in the world and just whatever you need in order to make it happen.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for speaking with What Matters Now in the Times of Israel. And thank you to Dr. Buzi Raviv, the director of the BGU radio station. And thanks to the 360 Initiative Center for their great support for the BGU Radio Center. And it's good to have this place to come to in the South in order to have these conversations. Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's What Matters Now, and stay tuned for our next installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have comments about this or other episodes, feel free to drop us an email at podcast@timesofisrael.com. And of course, always feel free to recommend us to other listeners and rate us wherever you find your podcasts. Take care and be well.